This is the Biblia Hebraica Quinta, the fifth set of Bibles, Quinta, put out by the Deutsche Bibelgesellschaft, the German Bible Society. This is the first of what will be 20 volumes, and when all the volumes are published, they will be combined into 2, 3, or even more volumes, much like this, the Biblia Hebraica Quinta, which preceded it, which also came out individually, one volume at a time. If you are going to purchase just one volume of Quinta, you want to get the Megillot, because this is where the lengthy introduction is in 3 different languages. That is German, English, and Spanish. In this video, I'll give you an introduction to Quinta, that is what it is and why you might want to use it. Next, I'll show you how to navigate the page and book layout, which is somewhat tricky. And then finally, what I'll do is give you a case study so you can see how to use Quinta in real life. There will be a few more videos to follow, so stay tuned for those. Just one note, Quinta is a Hebrew Bible in the truest sense, meaning it is just Hebrew. There are no English translations. You don't need to know Hebrew for this video, and even if you only know a little bit of Hebrew, Quinta can help you go very far. Plus, Quinta is available on accordance, so you are able to add any translation you would like. So let's get started. The Hebrew text of Quinta is that of the Leningrad Codex, which was written by Shmuel ben Yaakov, a Masorete, about 1,000 years ago, in the year 1008. The Masoretes were a group of scribes that responded to a very big problem. And the problem was that every single time a text of the Bible was copied, some small errors would creep in. It was just inevitable. So in order to stop this, the Masoretes added vowels, cantillation, and even notes so that the scribe would know exactly what they should be writing. You can see these notes on every single page of the Codex, and they're also in Quinta, but I won't be speaking about those today. That will be in the next video. So the Masoretes were a group of Jewish scribes responding to a problem. They were trying to stabilize the biblical text. But we can actually see well before them, 1,000 years earlier, that there was great instability in the biblical text. And these types of discrepancies are called variants. Variants are where one biblical text looks different from the one that we have today. And they can be found in Hebrew texts such as the Dead Sea Scrolls. They can be found in the Samaritan Torah. And they can be found in translations of the Hebrew, such as the Septuagint, also known as the Old Greek, the Aramaic Targums, the Latin Vulgate, the Syriac Peshitta, etc., etc. So, well before the Masoretes even came about, there was textual instability when it came to biblical texts, and about 1,000 years ago, the Leningrad Codex was written to try and stem this problem. Now, Quinta has 2 goals. First, it presents the Masoretic text of the Leningrad Codex, which is the oldest complete Tanakh we have today. Second, Quinta is going to alert you to variants found in ancient sources that we discussed, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Samaritan Torah, the Septuagint, and on and on and on. So at first glance, these 2 goals might seem very different. The Masoretes were living in Tiberias in the year 1000, and the Septuagint was written more than 1,000 years earlier, as were the Dead Sea Scrolls. So what does this all have to do with each other? The idea is that Quinta is all about the text of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. They are not trying to interpret it for you. They're trying to tell you what the text might have looked like in the Masoretic time and in the more ancient period when the text would have originally been written and copied and translated. If you enjoy this study and want to learn to read biblical Hebrew on your own, then consider taking a class with me at the Institute of Biblical Culture, where classes start every few months. These classes fill up, so register soon. In the course of 9 months, we will go from the alphabet to completing everything there is to know about introductory biblical Hebrew. That does it for the introduction. Let's move on to part 2, the page layout. What we're looking at here is the main text. This is the text of the Leningrad Codex, and if we zoom in, we can see that there are cantillation marks, there are vowels, etc., etc. For those of you who are wondering, well, wait, what would this look like without cantillation marks and vowels? Let's just take a look at the Dead Sea Scrolls here for 1 second, where we can see there are no dots, there are no vowels, there are no cantillation marks, and so on and so forth. So the first thing we see is the text of the Leningrad Codex. And then on the side and just below the text, we see that there are 2 areas for Mesorah notes. Those were the notes of the Masoretes. Those were the notes that Shmuel ben Yaakov decided to include in his codex, and I'll be speaking about those in my next video. Finally, at the bottom, we have what is known as the textual or scholarly apparatus. And in order to understand how to use this apparatus, we're actually going to have to go to the beginning of the book, where we can see there is a list of sigla, symbols, and abbreviations. Let's take a look at some sigla and symbols that we'll be using in just a few moments in our case study. The sigla are the abbreviations for ancient texts and ancient manuscripts. So the G, for example, stands for the Old Greek, that is the Septuagint. The T stands for the Targum, the Aramaic translation, and the V stands for the Vulgate, the Latin translation. For symbols, these are very important, and it does take a while to get used to them, but once you understand how to use them, they're very helpful. First, a black circle means that we are dealing with a new case, a new topic to discuss. Second, a straight line, that means that we have a variant, a new reading that is not found in our Masoretic text. And finally, when you see this nifty little plus sign, that means that there is a note in the back. There is a list of abbreviations, but I'm not going to go through them because they're pretty straightforward, and you can actually just look them up each time an abbreviation comes up by itself. So that does it for the page layout. We are now ready to begin with our case study. The example I chose is actually on the first page of the first volume of Quinta, that is the beginning of Ruth, and it is Ruth 1:5. In order to understand this, we need to know that in the first 4 verses of Ruth, Naomi had lost her husband, Elimelech, and she lost her 2 sons, Machlon and Chilion. And for our purposes, it's important to notice that this happened in this order. First, Naomi lost her husband, and then she lost her sons. Now let's go to the end of verse 5, which reads, Vatishaer ha'isha mishnei yiladeha umei isha. The woman remained alone from her 2 sons and from her husband. Even though the sons died after her husband, the sons are mentioned here first, and the husband is mentioned second. At this point in time, it may not seem significant that Ruth 1:5 is out of order, but we'll see in just a few moments that this will be the cause of a variant. Now let's go to the apparatus in Quinta, and the first thing we'll see is a black dot. And what that tells me is that we now have a new case, a new topic. We see the number 5 because we are in verse 5. Then what we get is the reading that we have in our Masoretic text, meaning the reading we have in the Leningrad Codex, which is Mishnei Yiladeha Umei Isha. She was left from her 2 sons and from her husband. The first thing Quinta is going to do is tell you ancient texts that agree with our Masoretic text. And the first thing to come up is 4Q Ruth A, and that is a Dead Sea Scroll. The number 4 stands for the 4th cave, and the Q stands for Qumran, where most of the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. So this text that we're about to read is from the 4th cave. And it's called Ruth A. The reason it's called Ruth A is because there's another text from that cave that's called Ruth B. So let's see how this text shapes up with our own text. Here what we're looking at is 4Q Ruth A on our verse, but it's hard to really read, so we can also look at it in infrared. And here what we can see is exactly what we have in our verse. Mishnei Yiladeha, from her 2 sons, Umei Isha. Even though the sons died second, the sons are mentioned here first. Let's return now to the apparatus. Next we see a V. That means the Vulgate. The Latin Vulgate has exactly what we have, that the sons are mentioned first and the husband is mentioned second. Next we see the T, the Targums. The sons are mentioned first, the husband is mentioned second, even though they died in an opposite order. At this point everything is nice and in agreement, and then we see the straight line. And what the line tells us, as we know, is that now we're going to have a variant, a different reading from the ancient text. And here we see Greek words followed by a G, which we know stands for the Old Greek, the Septuagint. And we see an S, which stands for the Syriac. And what do we see in the Greek? That the word for husband, andros, comes before the sons, the duo hion. In other words, the Septuagint has the same exact words, but the order is flipped. In our Masoretic text, the sons are mentioned first and the husband is mentioned second. But in the Septuagint, the husband is mentioned first and the sons are mentioned second. And here, what Quinta is going to tell us is why the order was flipped, is that it was a harm chron. And harm chron means a harmonization for the sake of chronology. Because the husband died first, he should be mentioned first. Because the sons died second, they should be mentioned second. So at this point, I already see we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are older than the Septuagint texts. The Dead Sea Scrolls are also in Hebrew, the original language. To me, this is a slam dunk. There's no reason to really take this variant all too seriously. But we see a little nifty plus sign, and that means we go to the back of the book where there are notes. And now we're at the back of the book, and we see there's a small, short note on our verse, Mishnei Yiladea Ume Isha, from her 2 sons and from her husband. The chronological order of events has been restored by the Old Greek and the Syriac. The chiastic order of M, the Masoretic text, should be preferred. It is confirmed by the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q Ruth A. And this short and sweet note, I really like it a lot because it explains the reasoning behind the 2 variant traditions. The Greek is trying to explain to you, oh, everything happened in order, so let's keep it all in order. But what the Hebrew is doing is actually something quite poetic. It's a chiasm, a special type of crisscross poetry. The word chiasm comes from the Greek letter chi, which is RX in English. And just as the X crisscrosses, so does the poetry. You start with the husband, and then the 2 sons dying, and then we start with the 2 sons dying, and then the husband. And when we match everything together, we get the crisscross, the chiasm. This is a very typical way of creating biblical poetry. It can be found throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. So I'm actually really happy with the note here. It was short and sweet, and it really explained what's going on in this variant. And even though I'm glad I know about the Greek text, in this case I'm also not really sold by it. I'd rather just rely on the Hebrew. That's it for now. Hopefully you've had a good introduction into what Quinta is and why you would want to use it. Hopefully you're also now familiar with the page layout and even the book layout, including the abbreviation list at the beginning and the notes at the back. And then finally, in our case study, we were able to see the Masoretic text, which was supported by the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the variant of the Septuagint, the Old Greek, which was trying to make sense of the chronology of Ruth 1:5. Stay tuned for my next 2 videos on Quinta, and as always, thanks for watching.